Hello, my dears. Come in, have a seat. Relax if you want. Pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Stories from my own life. Stories I've carried with me for decades, tucked away in the deepest, darkest corners of my memory. You see, when you reach my age, when you've lived 91 years in this world, you don't just collect wrinkles and white hair. You collect experiences, some wonderful, some horrifying. The wonderful ones fade over time, their colors washing out like old photographs left in the sun. But the horrifying ones, they stay sharp, crystal clear, just as vivid and chilling as the day they happened. So vivid that even now, when they come to mind, my knees ache. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 nights with you. 3 times I found myself alone on dark roads, driving through a darkness that felt heavy. The kind of darkness that presses against your windows and makes you wonder what truly lies beyond the reach of your headlights. These stories are real. Every word is true. I've never told them all together before, but I think it's time. Time to pass them on before I'm gone, so that maybe, just maybe, they'll help someone else recognize danger when they see it. So sit down. If you dare, dim your lights. And whatever you do, if you're listening to this late at night while driving, pull over first, and then begin listening to my first story carefully. And if you want to hear the rest of my stories while I'm still here to tell them, make sure you're subscribed, my dear. Now, before I tell you this story, there's something you need to understand. By the time you reach my age, you've lived long enough to recognize when something isn't quite right. I call it a knowing, a feeling in your bones that warns you danger is getting close. But sometimes, even that knowing comes too late. This happened in 1987, when I was 54 years old. My husband, Harold, had passed away 2 years earlier, and I was still trying to get used to living on my own. I had always been the passenger, you know. For our entire 35-year marriage, Harold did all the driving. But after he died, I had to learn to be independent. I got my driver's license at 52. Can you imagine? Most women my age had been driving since they were teenagers, but not me. Harold always said a woman's place was in the passenger seat, not behind the wheel. Well, Harold was wrong about a lot of things, God rest his soul. I had spent that evening at my daughter Patricia's house. She lived about 40 miles away, in the next county over, and I had gone to help her with some Christmas shopping for my grandchildren. Patricia had 3 little ones back then. Tommy was 8, Sarah was 6, and baby Michael was just 18 months old. We had a wonderful day together. We went to the mall, had lunch at her favorite restaurant, and I got to spoil my grandbabies a little. That's what grandmothers are for, after all. By the time we finished wrapping the gifts and eating dinner, It was nearly 10:30 p.m. Patricia begged me to spend the night. She had a perfectly nice guest room, and she didn't like the idea of me driving home so late. But I was stubborn. I had my own bed, my own routines, and my cat Mittens was waiting for her supper. I promised Patricia I'd call her as soon as I got home, kissed her and the children good night, and walked out to my car. I was driving a 1984 Buick LeSabre at the time. Cream-colored, brown vinyl roof, big as a boat. Harold had bought it brand new just a year before he passed, and it was the most expensive thing we owned after our house. That car was a dream, smooth and quiet. The heater worked perfectly, which mattered because it was December, and the temperature had dropped into the 20s. The drive started out fine. I took Highway 52, the main road that connected our two towns. It was a well-kept two-lane highway that passed by some farmland and a few stretches of forest. There were occasional traffic lights at intersections, but for the most part, it was a dark, empty road. I had the radio tuned to an AM station that played old classics, Perry Como, Nat King Cole, things like that. Listening to music made me feel a little less alone. About 25 minutes in, I noticed the fuel gauge hovering just above the red line. I had planned to fill up before leaving Patricia's, but we got talking so much that I completely forgot. I started to get a bit worried. The next town with a gas station was still 10 miles away, and I wasn't sure I'd make it. That's when I saw the glow up ahead. A gas station shining like a lantern in the dark. I had taken this route dozens of times, and I couldn't remember ever seeing a gas station at this point, but I was so relieved I didn't question it. Maybe it was new. Maybe I had just never noticed it before. I slowed down and pulled into the lot. If you saw a gas station appear out of nowhere this late at night, would you stop? Tell me in the comments. The place looked old, but not run down. It had two pumps under a metal canopy and a small building with a large picture window that glowed with warm yellow light. There was a sign that said, Roy's Service Station, in faded red letters. The parking lot was empty, except for an old pickup truck parked around the side. I pulled up to the first pump and turned off the engine. As I opened my door, the dome light came on, and I gathered my purse from the passenger seat. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. The radio had been playing, but now there was just silence. Not even the sound of wind or distant traffic. Just complete, total silence. It made my ears ring. I got out of the car and looked around. The air was so cold, it hurt my lungs. I could see my breath coming out in thick clouds. I walked toward the building, my shoes crunching on the gravel. Through the window, I could see someone sitting behind the counter. It looked like an older man, maybe in his 60s or 70s, wearing a brown work shirt. He was reading a newspaper. I pushed open the door, and a little bell jingled above my head. The man looked up slowly and I got my first good look at him. He had a gaunt, weathered face with deep-set eyes and thin gray hair combed straight back. His expression was completely neutral. No smile, no greeting, just a blank stare. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Could you turn on pump number 1 for me, please?" He didn't respond right away. He just looked at me, his eyes moving slowly from my face down to my shoes and back up again. It felt like he was assessing me, sizing me up. Finally, he spoke. "Pumps on," he said. His voice was rough and monotone. "Oh, wonderful. Thank you," I said. I turned to go back outside, but his voice stopped me. "You're out late." I turned back around. He was still staring at me with that blank expression. "Yes, well, I was visiting my daughter. I'm heading home now." "Long drive?" he asked. "Not too long. Another 15 miles or so," I said. Something about his questions made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't put my finger on why. He was just making conversation, wasn't he? "Dangerous road at night," he said. "Lot of accidents on this stretch." "Oh, I'll be careful," I assured him. "I'm a very cautious driver." He didn't respond to that. He just kept staring. I noticed his hands were resting flat on the counter, and they were abnormally large, with thick, blunt fingers. There was something about those hands that made me deeply uneasy. "Well, I'll just go fill up then," I said, and I quickly walked back outside. The cold air hit me again, but it actually felt better than being inside with that strange man. I unscrewed my gas cap and lifted the nozzle from the pump. As I started filling my tank, I looked around the lot. That's when I noticed something odd. The pickup truck, parked on the side of the building, had its windows completely covered with a heavy frost, like it had been sitting there for hours in the freezing cold. But there was something else. The snow around the truck was undisturbed. No footprints leading to or from it. No tire tracks. It looked like it had been there for days. I felt that knowing starting to creep up my spine. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. The pump clicked off. My tank was full. I hung up the nozzle and quickly walked back inside to pay. The man was in the exact same position, hands flat on the counter, staring at the door like he had been watching me the whole time. "That'll be $12.50, he said, before I could even speak. I opened my purse and pulled out my wallet. My hands were shaking slightly, though I told myself it was just from the cold. I counted out $13 and placed it on the counter. His large hand reached out and took the money, but his eyes never left my face. "You driving alone?" he asked. My heart started beating faster. That question. That's when I knew for certain something was very, very wrong. No gas station attendant asks a woman my age if she's driving alone at night unless he has bad intentions. "No," I lied. "My son is waiting in the car. He's not feeling well, so he stayed inside where it's warm." The man's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Suspicion? I couldn't tell. "Your change," he said, but he didn't count it out. He just pushed 2 quarters across the counter with one thick finger. I snatched up the coins quickly. "Thank you," I said, and I turned to leave. "Ma'am," his voice called out. I stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. My hand was on the handle. "You dropped something." I looked down at the floor near my feet. There was nothing there. When I looked back up at him, he was smiling. It was the first time I'd seen any expression on his face, and I wish I hadn't. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was predatory, like a wolf showing its teeth. "I don't see anything," I said, my voice shaking now. "Must have been mistaken," he said, still smiling. I pushed through the door and walked as fast as I could without running to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. I turned it, and the engine roared to life. I looked up at the building. The man was standing at the window now, watching me. His smile was gone. He was just staring again with those dead, calculating eyes. I put the car in reverse and started backing out. That's when I saw the movement in my peripheral vision. The door to the building opened, and the man stepped outside. He wasn't rushing, just walking at a steady, purposeful pace toward my car. I slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The Buick's tires spun for a second on the gravel before catching. And then I was flying out of that lot and back onto the highway. I looked in the rearview mirror. The man was standing in the middle of the parking lot, perfectly still, watching me disappear into the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might have a heart attack. I kept checking the mirrors, terrified that headlights would appear behind me. But there was nothing, just darkness. I drove the remaining 15 miles at 70 miles per hour, 20 miles over the speed limit. When I finally pulled into my driveway and saw my little house with the porch light on, I started crying. I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes, shaking and crying before I could calm myself enough to go inside. The next morning, after I had gotten some sleep and convinced myself I had overreacted, I decided to drive back to that gas station in daylight. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just a normal place, and that I had let my imagination run wild because I was tired and nervous about driving alone at night. I found the spot where I thought the gas station should be. I drove up and down that stretch of highway 3 times. There was nothing there. No gas station, no building, no sign, no gravel lot. Just an empty field with dead grass and some old fence posts. I pulled over onto the shoulder and got out of my car. I walked into the field looking for any sign that a structure had been there. Foundation, old pumps, anything. There was nothing, not even gravel, just undisturbed earth and weeds. I got back in my car and drove to the nearest town. I went into the local diner and asked the waitress how long Roy's service station had been closed. She looked at me funny. "Roy's service station?" she repeated. "Honey, that place burned down in 1952. My daddy used to talk about it. There was a fire, and Roy died in it. They never rebuilt. That land's been empty for 35 years. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I was there last night. I bought gas there." The waitress gave me a concerned look and patted my hand. "Maybe you're thinking of Miller's Gas Mart. That's about 8 miles north of here." I left the diner without ordering anything. I drove straight to Patricia's house and told her everything. She made me promise to never drive home alone at night again. And I never have. Not once in the last 37 years. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. A week after this happened, I was cleaning out my purse, and I found those 2 quarters the man had given me as change. I looked at the dates on them. Both quarters were dated 1951. 1 year before Roy's service station burned down. I threw those quarters in the trash immediately, but sometimes I still wonder, what would have happened if I had told that man I was alone? What would have happened if I had turned around when he said I dropped something? Was I talking to a ghost? Or was I talking to something far worse that was using the memory of that place as a trap? I don't have answers. All I know is that I pumped real gas into my car that night. Gas that took me home. Gas that shouldn't have existed. And I saw a man who looked at me like I was prey, not a customer. A man who smiled when I caught him in a lie. Some people say I must have been confused or tired. They say I must have stopped at a different gas station and misremembered it. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that on that cold December night in 1987, I came very close to something terrible. Something that was waiting for me in a place that shouldn't exist. I'm 91 years old now, and I've had a long life full of joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and loss. But that night at Roy's service station is the only time I've ever felt true terror, the kind that makes you understand how small and fragile you really are. And if you ever find yourself driving late at night and you see a gas station that doesn't quite look right, a place that seems a little too convenient, a little too perfectly timed for your need, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Run on fumes if you have to. Sleep in your car on the side of the road. But don't stop there, because some places aren't meant to be visited by the living, and some people aren't people at all. The second story I need to tell you happened about 15 years later, in the winter of 2002. I was 69 then, and by that point, I had grown quite used to driving. For years after that incident at Roy's gas station, I was tense behind the wheel. But eventually, necessity breeds courage. You can't live in fear forever, or else you stop living entirely. By 2002, I had moved into a smaller house in town after my knees started giving me trouble. The old farmhouse where Harold and I had raised our children had become too difficult to maintain. My new place was a modest two-bedroom cottage right in the heart of town on Maple Street. I liked being able to walk to everything during the day, though I could still drive when I needed to. By then, I had settled into a routine. Every Thursday evening, I drove to the community center for my sewing group. There were 6 of us, all around my age. And for 3 hours, we worked on our projects, shared gossip, and drank terrible coffee from the ancient drip machine they kept in the kitchen. To be honest, it was the highlight of my week. When you're a widow living alone, those social connections become lifelines. On that particular Thursday in February, we had completely lost track of time. We were working on a memorial quilt for Martha Henderson, who had lost her husband that fall, and we wanted to finish it before her birthday. Before we realized it, it was nearly midnight. We gathered our things, said our goodbyes, and headed toward the parking lot. The community center sat on the edge of town, where the commercial area began to turn into residential streets. The parking lot was small, room for maybe 15 cars, and poorly lit by a single street lamp that flickered constantly. One by one, the other women drove off, their taillights fading into the night. I was the last one there, fumbling with my keys in the cold. At the time, I was driving a different car, a 1998 Toyota Camry that my son-in-law had helped me purchase. It was reliable and easy to handle, though I missed the soft, comfortable ride of that old Buick. I opened the door, tossed my sewing bag onto the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. That's when I noticed the car parked at the very far end of the lot. It was an older model sedan, dark blue or black. I couldn't tell in the dim light. What caught my attention was that the driver's side door was standing wide open, and the interior light was on. But no one was around, no one getting in or out. The car just sat there, its door hanging open like a mouth. I started my engine and sat there for a moment, letting the heater warm up. I kept glancing at that car. Something about it made me uneasy. The door had been closed when I arrived 3 hours ago. I was sure of it. So who opened it? And where did they go? I thought about getting out and checking to see if someone needed help. Maybe they had a medical emergency and collapsed somewhere in the lot. But that knowing I told you about earlier started creeping in. That old instinct that had saved me at Roy's service station. It was telling me to leave now. I put the Camry in reverse and backed out of my spot. As I turned to exit the lot, my headlights swept across that open car door. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. They were slouched so low I hadn't seen them before. But when my headlights illuminated the interior, I could clearly see the silhouette of a person behind the wheel. They weren't moving, just sitting there in the cold with the door open, staring straight ahead. I couldn't see their face, just the dark outline of a head and shoulders. I should have driven away right then. But curiosity and concern got the better of me. I rolled down my window about 2 inches and called out, "Are you all right over there? Do you need help?" No response. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly now. Something was very wrong. I put my car in drive, ready to leave. But then the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, the head turned toward me. Even from across the parking lot, even with the poor lighting, I could feel eyes locking onto me, staring, studying. Then the figure started to get out of the car. The movements were strange, jerky, like a puppet being controlled by an amateur puppeteer. One leg came out, then the other. The person stood up, and I realized with horror that they were tall, very tall, at least 6.5 feet, maybe more. And they started walking toward me. Not fast, but with steady, deliberate steps. There was something wrong about the way they moved. Their knees didn't bend quite right. Their arms hung too loosely at their sides. I didn't wait to see more. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, and my Camry shot out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard a sound that still echoes in my mind even now on some nights. A voice, if you could even call it that. High-pitched and trembling, as if someone were trying to imitate human speech, but couldn't quite get it right. It said something that might have been "wait" or "help," but it was so distorted I couldn't be sure. I didn't even look back. I drove straight through town, ignoring the single stop sign on Main Street. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see headlights following me. But the road behind me stayed dark. When I got home, I pulled into the driveway and sat there with the engine running and the doors locked. I stared at my house, the familiar porch light, the front door I'd walked through thousands of times. Everything looked normal, safe, welcoming, but I couldn't get that figure in the parking lot out of my mind. The wrong movement, the broken voice. Eventually, I gathered the courage to run from the car to the front door, fumbling with my keys like a teenager in a horror movie. Once inside, I locked the deadbolt, the chain, and even shoved a chair in front of the door. I went through the whole house, checking every window, every lock, turning on every light. I called Patricia that night, waking her up. I told her what happened, and she wanted to call the police. But what would I tell them? That someone was sitting in their own car with the door open? That they got out and walked toward me? It sounded ridiculous, even as I thought about it. Patricia made me promise to stop going to quilting circles so late at night, and I agreed. But here's the part that still troubles me, the detail that transformed this from an unsettling encounter into something truly sinister. The next morning, after I'd gotten some sleep and daylight had restored a bit of my courage, I drove back to the community center. I told myself I was being foolish, that I'd probably encountered someone who was drunk or having a mental health crisis, and that my imagination had filled in the rest. The parking lot looked completely different in the daylight. Safe, mundane, boring. There were a few cars there for the morning aerobics class that met in the gym. But parked in the exact spot where I'd seen that car the night before was a vehicle that made my stomach drop. It was the same dark sedan. Same make, same color, same everything. But now, it was completely burned out. The windows were blown out, the interior was charred black, and the metal was warped from intense heat. It looked like it had been on fire, but there was no smell of smoke in the air. No fire trucks had been there, no police tape, no signs of any emergency response whatsoever. I parked my car and got out, walking slowly toward the burned vehicle. Up close, it was even more disturbing. The driver's seat was completely destroyed, burned down to the springs. The steering wheel was melted. But the strangest thing was that the fire damage was contained entirely to the interior of the car. The outside had some black marks, but it wasn't damaged the way a car that had actually caught fire would be. It was like something inside the car had burned incredibly hot, but the fire never spread beyond the windows. I looked at the ground around the car. There were no scorch marks on the pavement, no debris, nothing to indicate when this fire had happened or how. A maintenance worker was emptying trash cans nearby, and I called out to him. "Excuse me, when did this car catch fire?" He looked at me, confused. "What car?" "This one," I said, pointing at the burned sedan right in front of us. He walked over, looked at the car, and shook his head. "That thing? It's been here for 3 weeks. Owner abandoned it, and we've been waiting for the tow company to come get it. It's been like that since it was left here." "It's been burned like this for 3 weeks?" I asked. "Burned?" He looked at the car more carefully. "Lady, that car isn't burned. It's just old and beat up. Look at it." I stared at the car. In that moment, I saw both things simultaneously. My eyes saw a burned-out husk, blackened and destroyed, but somehow, underneath that image, I could also perceive what the maintenance worker was seeing: an old, dented, dirty sedan that had been abandoned. It was like looking at one of those optical illusions where you can see two different images depending on how you focus your eyes. I felt dizzy. The world tilted slightly. "I need to go," I said, and I walked quickly back to my car. As I was driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. For just a second, I saw something in the back window of that abandoned car. A face, pale and distorted, pressed against the glass, watching me leave. Then I blinked, and it was gone. If you're still watching, drop a bomb in the comments so I know you didn't blink too. I never went back to Quilting Circle. I told the ladies I was having trouble with my knees and couldn't drive at night anymore. They were understanding and even offered to pick me up. But I always made excuses. I couldn't tell them the truth, that I was terrified of that parking lot, of that car, of whatever I had encountered that night. Here's what I believe happened, though I know it sounds impossible. I think I saw something that existed between states, between life and death, between here and somewhere else. That car was a doorway, and whatever was sitting inside it was using it as a lure. If I had gotten out of my car to help, if I had gotten close enough, I think I would have been pulled through that doorway, pulled into whatever burned-out hellscape that thing came from. The way it moved, the way its voice sounded, the way the car appeared burned to me, but normal to everyone else. These weren't hallucinations. They were glimpses of something that doesn't belong in our world, something that was trying to cross over and needed someone like me, someone alone and vulnerable to complete the crossing. I'm grateful for my fear that night, grateful that I drove away instead of investigating, because I truly believe that if I had approached that car, if I had accepted that thing's invitation, I would have disappeared. They would have found my abandoned Camry in the parking lot, and no one would have ever known what happened to the old lady who went to Quilting Circle and never came home. If you want me to tell the third and final story, hit the like button and let me know. Now, the third and final story I want to share with you happened much more recently. This incident took place only 5 years ago, in 2018. I was 86 years old, and to be honest, I really shouldn't have been driving at night anymore. My eyes didn't see the way they used to. My reflexes had slowed down considerably, and my children were constantly pressuring me to give up my license. But I'm stubborn. I always have been. Independence matters to me, and the idea of relying on others for every small thing made me feel helpless. This happened in October, right before Halloween. The leaves had taken on those beautiful autumn colors, and there was a crispness in the air that made me nostalgic for my younger years. My great-grandson, Patricia's grandson, Ethan, was turning 7, and his birthday party was being held at Patricia's house. She had moved back into the old family farmhouse after I sold it, fixed it up beautifully, and was now raising her own grandchildren there. The circle of life, as they say. The party was wonderful. About 15 children were running around, all fueled by cake and ice cream, playing in the barn and the yard. I stayed afterward to help Patricia clean up, and by the time we finished washing dishes and taking down decorations, it had already gotten dark outside. In October, the sun sets early, and I hadn't realized how late it had become. "Mom, please stay the night," Patricia said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "It's already past 8, and that road is rough even during the day." "Nonsense," I said, brushing her off. "I've driven that road 1,000 times. I could do it with my eyes closed." "That's what worries me," she said, but she smiled. She knew that once my mind was made up, arguing with me was pointless. I gathered my purse and coat, said goodbye to Patricia and her husband, and walked to my car. At the time, I was driving a 2015 Honda Civic, a nice little car my grandson helped me buy after my old Camry finally gave out. It had all sorts of modern features I could never quite figure out. But Patricia's husband had programmed my address into the GPS, so at least I wouldn't get lost on my way home that night. The first part of the drive went fine. I took the county roads that connected Patricia's property to the main highway. These were roads I'd known all my adult life, running through farmland and patches of woods. Traffic was light, which I appreciated. Fewer cars meant fewer headlights, blinding me from the opposite direction. After about 20 minutes of driving, I noticed the fog beginning to roll in. At first, it was just thin wisps across the road. But within minutes, it thickened so much that I could barely see 10 yards in front of the car. This wasn't unusual for our area in October. Cold nights and warm days create these heavy pockets of fog that settle in valleys and low spots. I slowed down to about 25 miles per hour, leaning forward in my seat, squinting through the windshield. The fog had an odd quality to it. It seemed to glow slightly in my headlights, almost like it was alive and moving with purpose rather than just drifting. I turned on my high beams, but that only made it worse, the light bouncing back at me and making it even harder to see. That's when I saw the girl. She appeared so suddenly in my headlights that I gasped and slammed on the brakes. My car skidded slightly before coming to a stop about 15 feet from her. She was standing in the middle of the road, right on the center line, facing my car. Be honest. Would you stop the car if you saw a child in the road? Tell me in the comments. She looked to be about 12 or 13 years old, wearing a white nightgown that seemed to shimmer in the fog. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down past her shoulders. Her feet were bare. She was just standing there, completely still, staring at my car. My first thought was that she must be sleepwalking. I'd heard of children wandering out of their houses in the middle of the night, not fully conscious. I put my car in park and turned on my hazard lights. I opened my door and called out to her, "Sweetie, are you all right? Are you lost?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there in that white nightgown, her arms hanging at her sides. The fog swirled around her feet like it was dancing. I took a few steps toward her, my knees protesting the movement. "Honey, it's dangerous to be in the road. Where do you live? Let me help you get home." As I got closer, I could see her face more clearly. She was pale, almost luminescent in the strange glow of the fog. Her eyes were dark, too dark, like they were all pupil with no iris. And she wasn't blinking, not at all. She just stared at me with those black eyes, utterly motionless. That knowing hit me like a physical blow. Every instinct in my body started screaming at me to get back in the car. This wasn't a lost child. This was something else. Something wrong. I stopped walking and took a step backward. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. For the first time, she moved. Her head tilted slowly to the left, far too far, at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. Then she smiled. It was the most horrible smile I've ever seen. Too wide, showing too many teeth, stretching her face in ways that faces shouldn't stretch. And then she started walking toward me. Not the hesitant steps of a child, but smooth, gliding movements, like she was floating above the road rather than walking on it. Her bare feet never seemed to actually touch the pavement. I ran. I don't care that I'm an 86-year-old woman with bad knees and arthritis. Terror gave me speed I didn't know I still had. I made it to my car, threw myself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the car into drive. I looked up through the windshield. She was right there, standing directly in front of my car, inches from the hood. Her face was pressed against the invisible barrier between us. That terrible smile, still stretching her features. She raised one hand and placed it flat against the air, and I heard a sound like nails scraping on glass, even though she wasn't touching the car. I couldn't drive forward without hitting her, and some deeply ingrained part of my brain, despite the terror, couldn't bring itself to run over what looked like a child. So I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas. The Civic shot backward, tires squealing. I cranked the wheel, doing a clumsy three-point turn, and then I was racing back the way I'd come. I looked in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the middle of the road, that white nightgown glowing in my taillights, watching me flee. Then the fog swallowed her up, and she was gone. I drove back to Patricia's house, doing 60 miles per hour on roads I should have been doing 30 on. I was crying and shaking, barely able to keep the car steady. When I pulled into Patricia's driveway, I laid on the horn until lights started coming on in the house. Patricia came running out in her bathrobe, terrified something was wrong with me. And something was wrong. I was having a panic attack for the first time in my life. She helped me inside, and I told her everything through gasping breaths. She wanted to call the police, but I begged her not to. What would I tell them? That I saw a girl in a nightgown who smiled wrong? I spent the night at Patricia's house. The next morning, her husband, David, volunteered to drive my route in daylight to see if there was any sign of what I'd seen. He came back 2 hours later, looking puzzled. "Martha," he said gently, "there's no houses anywhere near where you described seeing that girl. No farms, no buildings, nothing. Just empty fields and forest for miles. And I checked with the sheriff's department. No missing children reported in the county." I knew what he was implying, that I'd imagined it, that my old mind was playing tricks on me, that it was time to seriously consider giving up driving at night. And maybe he was right about that last part. But I know what I saw. Here's the thing that convinced me it was real, though. When David brought my car back, he walked around it checking for damage, making sure everything was okay. And he found something on the hood, right in the center, exactly where that girl had been standing. There was a handprint, small, child-sized, pressed into the metal so hard it left a dent. The paint around it was blistered and cracked, like it had been exposed to intense heat. David showed it to me, and we both just stared at it. "I don't know what could have done this," he said quietly. "This metal is dented inward, like something pressed down on it with incredible force. But there's no other damage around it. It's like someone punched the hood with their palm, but didn't leave any other marks. I had that handprint fixed at a body shop the next week. I told them I'd had a run-in with some vandals. But I remember what it looked like. I remember the perfect outline of those small fingers, the deep impression in the metal, the scorched paint. I stopped driving at night after that. My children were right. It was time. But it wasn't because of my eyesight or my reflexes. It was because I finally understood something I'd been learning my whole life through all these experiences I've shared with you tonight. The roads at night belong to something else. Something that isn't quite human. Something that's been there long before we paved over the dirt paths and called them highways. These things use our roads now, walking along them, standing on them, waiting in the darkness between the streetlights. Most of the time, they let us pass by without incident. But sometimes, for reasons I don't understand, they take an interest in someone. They test us. They invite us to step closer, to help, to investigate. And if we accept that invitation, I think we cross a threshold we can never cross back over. I've been lucky. 3 times, I encountered something that wasn't human on a dark road. And 3 times, I escaped. That gas station that shouldn't exist. That burned car that was a doorway to somewhere else. And that girl in the fog who smiled too wide. Each time, something warned me to run, and I listened. So here's my advice to you, my dears. The wisdom I've earned through 91 years of life and 3 terrifying encounters on lonely roads. If you're driving at night and something feels wrong, trust that feeling. If someone asks for help in a way that makes your skin crawl, keep driving. If you see something that shouldn't be there, don't investigate it. Just go. Get somewhere safe, somewhere with lights and people and life. Because the things that walk our roads at night, they're patient. They've been here longer than any of us, and they'll be here long after we're gone. They can afford to wait for the next traveler, the next person who stops to help, the next curious soul who wants to know what's really out there in the dark. Don't be that person. Whatever you do, don't be that person. If you want more of my real encounters, hit like and subscribe. And tell me, do you trust the roads at night?